everyone, and welcome to Bridging the Gap. I'm your host, Kelly Lovell, and this week we're talking about how to find startup success with our expert guest, Sean Wise. Sean is an expert on startups and venture capital. He spent 5 seasons as a consultant on CBC on the mega hit venture reality show Dragon's Den. Now he's in front of the camera as the host of his own show, The Naked Entrepreneur, which airs on Oprah Winfrey. Sean, thank you again for joining us. Can you maybe share with our listeners how you got started and entered into the startup world?
Absolutely. It all started in a McDonald's, if you can believe it. I was 13 years old, and it was the first job I had, and I was a fry guy making the fries, and I noticed at the end of every shift, we would throw out a lot of food. And back then I thought, McDonald's is reasonable food, so why are we throwing it away? And I went to my manager, and I said, could I take the food at the end of the shift, right before it gets thrown away, package it up and give it to shelters and other food banks that there's a lot of needy people in my city. And what amazed me wasn't the answer. The answer was no. What amazed me was he went out and brought back this monster book. It must have been 500 pages long, this binder, if you will. And he showed me some clause. I don't remember the number. I joked that it was 812. That said you couldn't do that. And so he wasn't going to allow me to feed people in my city with food that was going in the garbage anyway, not because he thought it was a bad idea, but because someone else told him not to in writing. And so I went home and I explained this to my parents, and they said to me something I never forgot. They said that if you don't like it, don't work for other people. And my parents are both entrepreneurs. They were both high school, graduates or dropouts, and they really embraced entrepreneurship. So at 13, I started my first business. And then ever since, that's what I've been focused on, how to become a better entrepreneur, how to become a better investor in entrepreneurs, how to become a better mentor for entrepreneurs. And so from a very young age, I've been obsessed with this idea of finding the path to startup success.
In entrepreneurship, I always find that kind of every entrepreneur's journey is different, but sometimes it always seems as if no one intentionally decides that they want to be an entrepreneur. It usually is that they're inspired by some sort of major gap or inspiration to kind of make the future a better place in some capacity. And that kind of just, they end up taking charge and wanting to make that happen, and they kind of around the way realize they just started a business and such. Do you find that? Do you find that entrepreneurship sometimes is more of an organic journey, or are you finding now through some of your work that you do, because you are a professor and such, that people are just consciously choosing that I just want to be an entrepreneur and start my businesses, but I don't know what I want to start. I just know I want to be an entrepreneur.
So there's a lot of questions baked in there, Kelly, and I think they're all really, really good. So, the first one is, do people choose to be entrepreneurs? Are they born entrepreneurs? Are they bred entrepreneurs? And so I have to take a little disagreement with you. I think people choose to be an entrepreneur. I think you can have some appetite for risk or innovative thinking. I think you can have some backgrounds, like we teach entrepreneurship at Ryerson. But I think there comes a moment in your life when you decide, I'm going to do this. And sometimes that's by force. You come to a country and you're new and you don't have the right documentation, so you've got to make your own job instead of get a job. And other times it's because, exactly as you've identified, there's an unmet market need. I needed service X. It wasn't there, so I made it. But I think there's a choice involved. And the reason why I think that's important to highlight is, when are you an entrepreneur? Are you an entrepreneur after you've succeeded? Are you an entrepreneur while you're succeeding? I was in Sault Ste. Marie, a small town in Canada, this week, and a young lady came up to me and she says, I'm trying to be an entrepreneur. And I had to stop her, Kelly, because I don't think she's trying to be an entrepreneur. I think she is an entrepreneur. The act of entrepreneurship is an action. It's a verb. It's the doing that matters. And yes, some people do it to replace a job or they don't want to work, and other people do it because they're driven by an unmet market need. And some people do it not even by choice, because they got fired from a job or they got laid off, or even nowadays they're young and they're underemployed and they want to do better for themselves, or even they're in the later stage of their lives and they don't want to retire and they want to reinvent themselves. So I think entrepreneurship is a choice, but I do think there's a lot of circumstances that play into it.
And with that in mind, with the circumstances and the choice, are there certain traits that an individual needs to be successful as an entrepreneur?
So there are certain traits that an individual needs to be an entrepreneur, but there's also some myths. It's a myth that entrepreneurship is for just the young or just the old. There's no scientific evidence of that. In fact, we have lots of evidence of the opposite. Women versus men, there's no scientific evidence there. Through the internet, where no one knows how old you are, what gender you are, what you look like, a lot of people can make a great success, regardless of what city they live in or how much access they have. So I think that there's a lot of myths around you have to be born a certain way or you have to be a certain height, and I don't think any of them are true. Now, attributes, that's definitely true. We know that the greatest entrepreneurs are resilient, meaning they have a high adversity quotient, which is a fancy way to say they get up every time they get knocked down. Someone says no to them, and they're thinking, okay, the next one will be yes. I'm not talking about just blind optimism, which it might seem like if you watch episodes of Shark Tank or Dragon's Den, but it's not that. It's the resilience to pursue. And of every entrepreneur I've ever learned from Kevin O'Leary to Sir Richard Branson, from Debbie Travis to Arlene Dickinson, they've all had this high adversity quotient, this ability to look at the bright side, to get up after being knocked down. So a trait that people can practice and a trait that people can work on is their own resiliency. I think the other thing that's very common among most successful entrepreneurs is they have what's known as an internal locus of control. So an internal locus of control says, I'm in charge of my life. If I fail an exam, it's because I didn't work right, I didn't work smart, I didn't work hard enough. An external locus of control, which unfortunately I find a lot of people have, is it's someone else's fault. The professor made the exam too hard. Now, what we've noticed is that in entrepreneurs, they are 110% internal locus of control. In fact, that's what's driving them. They believe not only should this problem be solved, this unmet market need be filled, but they believe that they're the ones to fill it. And that's what keeps them going when they get knocked down.
Mm-hmm. Well, I really agree. That internal fire is key as an entrepreneur, because there's plenty of water to snuff out that fire in this world, and you need to be able to withstand the weather, so to speak, in that sense. Yeah. And I wonder, though, as we were talking about these traits, because this is a big debate in terms of can entrepreneurs be made or are they born, and obviously some aspire to be an entrepreneur, but they may not have all these traits innate to them. So can some of these traits be learned, and if so, what is kind of the best strategy going about that?
So I think you said it right. They can be learned. So I get asked a lot, and it's kind of funny because I'm a professor of entrepreneurship, and people seem to just ask me, well, you can't teach entrepreneurship. So at Ryerson, Canada's largest school for entrepreneurship, we actually believe you cannot teach entrepreneurship. I said that right. You cannot teach entrepreneurship. But you can facilitate the learning of entrepreneurship. And there's a number of ways you can do that. One of those ways is called modeling. And modeling is where you find someone who has the skills that you really, really want, and you emulate them. If you want to be a great speaker, maybe you look at Barack Obama. If you want to be a great leader, maybe you look at Oprah Winfrey. And you use them to master traits and to adopt things that you don't know. So modeling is a great thing. The second thing that we know is really helpful to build up entrepreneurship as an attribute is doing. And so the more you do entrepreneurship, and I'll tell you what I mean by that in 1 second, the more comfortable you become. So there's great things out there like Startup Weekend, where over 72 hours, hundreds of people get together in your city and hundreds of cities around the world, and they build a startup. And while not all those startups succeed, dozens have, but not all of them do, the doing of entrepreneurship is its own reward. Because then when you have a good idea or when you're searching for a good idea, you already have that muscle worked. And that's sort of the third thing that I often recommend to my students. So the first thing is to model after people who already have done what you want to do. The second thing being you have to learn by doing, just like if you're an athlete and you want to shoot a basketball in a game, you've got to shoot 1,000 of them before the game. Entrepreneurship is the same thing. You've got to take every opportunity to be entrepreneurial. And the third thing is a really not well-known thing, but it's a growing piece of knowledge, and that is mindfulness. So we know that through the practice of mindfulness, whether that be meditation or any of the other forms of mindfulness that you can deploy, your brain becomes more resilient. And why that's important is, as you mentioned, there's a lot of water in the world trying to snuff out your passion fire. And resilience, especially internal resilience and mental strength, is a key asset for entrepreneurship. But the best news is you can do that at home. You don't need any fancy gym membership or weights. You can practice mindfulness every day, just like you can practice entrepreneurship every day, and just like you can learn to model after people every day. You know what? If you want to be an entrepreneur, then go be an entrepreneur.
As you're explaining that, I'm just kind of going through my own journey and kind of seeing if there's themes, and I definitely agree that those are 3 key steps in that kind of in the evolution of becoming an entrepreneur.
Example, Kelly. But Kelly, you're a perfect example. You've reached great heights, and I know you've had role models and mentors. I know that firsthand. I know that you've been working on this for a while. You didn't wake up yesterday. And finally, I don't know if you practice active mindfulness, but you seem very much, if you read your Twitter feed, to be focused on being mindful of what you're working on. So I would guess that whether you knew this or not, you might have already been doing some of these things.
Yes, and well, interesting. My journey started like I didn't learn entrepreneurship in a formal way, and I think I agree with you in the sense that you create environments that can foster entrepreneurship, but you can't like just read a textbook or a book about entrepreneurship and then think that you could be an entrepreneur because you read the book. And I think that
I think you're onto something right there, right? Because a lot of people, it's not physics. You're not teaching a formula. It's entrepreneurship. That's why everyone at Ryerson has been an entrepreneur if you're going to teach entrepreneurship. Yes, we have PhDs, but we've all been either professional investors, or we've all been CEOs of startups, or we've all been founders. And that allows you to create those environments just like you're describing.
You really, and I think a key to that is definitely, like you said, immersing yourself in the environment, both in terms of immersing yourself in terms of building a network. In one of our previous podcasts, we talked about how kind of finding your tribe, so to speak, when you're starting off. But I think if you're interested about entrepreneurship and you're just even curious about it, starting, like you said, to go things to startup weekends or environments where you're going to meet other entrepreneurs is a really important way to first experience that and get a taste for it, but also start to, like you said, model and build some of those, kind of collect some of those traits and absorb some of them.
Now, Kelly, some people in the audience may be thinking that, well, I can't afford to go to these events. And let me give you a really cool life hack. When the event is announced in your city, and there are events like Startup Canada, Startup Toronto, Startup New York, Startup Dallas, wherever you are, there's a startup community. Just look at meetups.com and Google Startup. Best trick anyone under the age of 20 can do is volunteer. There's always a need for someone to help at the door. And by doing that, you meet everyone as they come in, and you get to see the speaker, and you save your $10 or $20 or $30. So that's something I always recommend to my students.
Volunteerism, I think, is so critical, and I think it goes right on to that second point that you were making about doing. It's definitely something, like we said, it's not something you just can read about and you think you can have like 1 + 1 = 2. It's not as simple with entrepreneurship. I think everyone's journey is a little different, and you don't really know that until you immerse yourself in it. And by volunteering, you can get a taste for that because you can start to practice and exhibit some of those skills. You can even volunteer to help startups, sometimes even just shadow and sometimes learn some of those skills. But I really feel that you're right in the sense that you have to go in the market. You can't build a market siloed in your basement and expect that it's just going to be successful just because all of the literature says that everyone's supposed to like your product. Until you actually go into the market and you do it and you hear the feedback and you work with the people, it's a very different story. With your experiences, do you find that there are is there any other common mistakes that startups seem to assume or do when they're first starting out that we should be looking out for?
Well, yeah, I'm really glad you asked that question, and you've even hinted at the answer already. You know, startups are a little bit different than small businesses. You know, a startup is looking for its business model. It's trying different things. It may not know who its customer is. So that's a lot of uncertainty. But one of the greatest things that's happened since 2008 is we now know the path. We now know the steps to startup. And we're able to do that because in the late 90s, there was the first real wave of technology startups. And then in 2008, we had the sort of Web 2.0 renaissance with Facebook and Twitter. And now we have this new generation called the age of the unicorn, where you have these Ubers of the world, these Tinders. But what it's allowed us to do, us being observers or investors, is to map the process. And in 2008, a mentor of mine, Professor Steve Blank from Stanford, he sort of started to teach that method. And then a number of us have gone and studied it. And it's the idea that in the 21st century, the barriers to launch a company are so low that you don't need to do them. It used to be that you would go and write a business plan, and then you would raise some money, and then you would keep your product all secret, and then you'd launch, and then you'd find out no one cares. Millions of dollars later, you find out no one cares. 2 years of your life gone, no one cares. So now we don't do that. We instead work backwards. We work with our customer segments, the ones we have access to, the ones we're passionate about, to find the biggest unmet market needs. And then we work with the customers. You get out of the building, so to speak, to collaborate to build it. And then you build a manual version and see if anyone buys it, if anyone cares. That takes your time to testing if you're going to fail or fly from 2 years to 30 days or less. And then and only then do you go out and build the product once you know you have a customer. You've seen this all the time in Kickstarter, okay? Somebody thinks what the world needs is an iPhone on a watch. So they build the Pebble. And they say, oh, I can't build the Pebble because I need $100,000 to buy the parts to get it set up. So they said, I'm going to go to Kickstarter. And I'm going to say to people, this watch is going to be $300. But if you contribute today, you'll get one for $150. So they're pre-selling products that don't exist. Then they wake up the next day and there's $10 million in pre-orders. They have so much pre-orders that they can go buy the factory and build Pebble Watch, and then later iWatch would come up. My point is that there's no barriers. The cost to do a Kickstarter campaign is in the hundreds of dollars. And I think no matter where you are, who you are, you can access that. So I think that today, the biggest mistake that young founders do is they assume it's still a mystery like it was for 900 years. When I went to school a long time ago, they used to give us a book on Benjamin Franklin and say, learn entrepreneurship from him, or Thomas Edison. Now, I like those guys as role models, but they don't tell me how to start a blog. They don't tell me how to engage a community. They don't tell me how to set price. And I guess the big mistake, the thing that I hate is it's hard enough being an entrepreneur. You might as well learn from others instead of having to learn from your own mistakes.
Yes. If you're, I always like to look at it like if you're kind of on a road trip, so to speak, and your mentors and your advisors already have gone down past and they know that there's a dead end or there's a cliff. So why waste your time going to the cliff when you can speed past it and take the highway, so to speak?
That is a great metaphor. I have to ask your permission to steal it one day.
Yes, of course. And I like how you were talking about, and I want to just touch a little bit deeper on it. You mentioned kind of the standard way and the traditional way, which I still find sometimes is taught as we're growing in kind of exploring entrepreneurship and startup, is this idea of, so you have an idea, you build a business plan, then you build up the product, and then you bring it to market and such. Do you feel that a formal business plan is necessary for entrepreneurs as their first step in building a startup?
Kelly, it's not a matter of feeling. I know. It is not appropriate to write a business plan. Okay? The only people teaching business plans haven't caught up with 2008. Okay? I can tell you this because Harvard, Columbia, Ryerson, Waterloo, Stanford, they don't have a business plan competition anymore. That was a big thing when I went to school. You would compete for $50,000 based on this document that you made up in your mother's basement. And all of those organizations have canceled their business plan competitions and replaced them with new venture competitions. And instead of a business plan, they use something called a lean canvas. And a lean canvas, for your audience who doesn't know, is just an 11 by 17 piece of paper that has 9 different boxes on it, and each box represents an element of your business model: revenue, customers, early adopters, problem, solution. And it gives you a method to test all of your ideas. Because a business plan, the problem was no one ever read it. It was written in silence in your basement and then passed around like a piece of gold. Okay, but it didn't actually show who believed in it. It maybe had a few footnotes. Today, you don't write a business plan. Today, you go out and run a bunch of experiments to confirm your hypotheses. people who are this age in this city with this problem will buy this product. And you test them one at a time so that you're on that road trip, but you're constantly making course corrections, or as we call them, pivots. The idea of a business plan is that on day one, you're going to know where you're going to end up, and that's just total BS. There's no way you can know. I mean, Viagra was a heart medication, right? There's so many things that started. A Flickr was a video game. Like, there's so many things that turn Uber, I'm trying to think of some other, Groupon. They were all different things when they started. And so the whole point is writing a business plan would only work if you could see the future. And if you could see the future, I have lots of better uses of your superpowers. So instead, instead we do these lean canvases, and they take about a half hour. And if you've never heard of one, you can Google lean canvas, and you'll see videos of professors, myself, and other people trying to explain. But what it does is it turns all of your guesses. I think single women under the age of 30 need a pair of high heels that have a hinge on it so that they can walk flats at the end of the night. Okay, well, maybe they do, maybe they don't. But sitting in a basement typing away 50 pages isn't going to help my business. Going to talk to women in that demographic, building a prototype out of duct tape and a broken shoe, and showing it to them and asking about their experience with shoes, now that is the way you build a business. Because based on your customers' unmet market needs, you build a product that someone actually cares about, instead of trying to sell some product that you don't know anybody who wants.
And especially when you co-create it with the one who's going to buy it. Obviously, if they're a part of designing it and such, you can believe more confidently that they're going to want to buy it. Where if it's something where you're just assuming that they want something, that can definitely steer you in different directions sometimes.
I totally agree, except for one thing. You don't have to guess that they want it. You can take their money in advance. You'll know when you have something when people are begging to pay you even though it's not finished.
Yes. That's when you know that you have that's when you know you really have something to run with, so to speak.
And to write a business plan, to spend all that time, is to run around in circles talking to yourself.
And also, it can be quite overwhelming when you're first starting out, and you're a first-time entrepreneur, let's say, and you don't even know what the journey ahead is, and you're expected to kind of write it down in 20 pages or more in a giant essay format. It can be quite an overwhelming thing. With that in mind, though, so the Lean Canvas focuses on kind of getting that initial kind of mindset and at least considering all the key parts of getting your business and elements. One thing I do find that's very common, though, with entrepreneurs is sometimes we can get tunnel vision and think very short term, where we're very focused on, okay, I just want to get this product to market, or I just want to get my first sale, or do these things. So what is your opinion on the role that thinking long term and some of the planning of your business of where you want to be and the steps that you take to get there when you're starting out? Because I think sometimes we think very short term, but that sometimes can come up and bite us at the end when we actually get to the end of the rope.
Well, the Lean Canvas isn't short-term thinking, because the Lean Canvas is 5 to 10 years out. I think you have to get back to the very basics. If you want to travel to New York City, and that's your goal, do you really care if you take a plane, a train, or an automobile? It only matters that you get to New York City. And if your goal of launching a startup is to have a successful startup, then you shouldn't really care whether you have a product, a service, or a solution. You should just focus on where you're trying to go. So your long-term solution is success. That's what you're working on. You don't need to worry about anything else other than that. It doesn't matter if you end up with a website or an app. Steve Jobs never set out to build an iPhone. He set out to make people's lives better with technology.
Mm-hmm. So it comes back to that vision of having a clear sense of vision and not so much attached to the product as much as the end goal or benefit that you're trying to create with the product.
Well, let me show you by example. Kelly, you created this great podcast because you wanted to bridge the gap of knowledge between people who are supposedly experts and people who want to one day be experts. It doesn't matter if they're reading you in a blog or they're reading you in a podcast. You're moving towards your goal, an enlightened community that's better off. You know, you don't care in 5 years when someone writes to you and says, you inspired me to be a billionaire, if they read the blog or the podcast. You only care that you've got your mission accomplished. And I think that too many people are getting stuck trying to sell red shoes when they don't even know if people are barefoot.
Yes, I love that. I'm going to have to quote you on that one because I think that's so true, and something that we need to be very aware of is understanding what is that vision and not losing sight of that founding story. I think too, we're talking a lot now about starting up and such. So let's say now, move the needle a little bit more forward. So we have now gotten our pre-sales and such, and we are moving forward, or maybe we are having a little bit of a successful business now under our belt. Where do we focus next in terms of, I think sometimes the market is very easy to kind of shift us in one direction or push us in another way. And do you have any tips to how to remember to stay core to your founding vision and stay kind of on that trajectory to go to New York and not get sidetracked and take a detour to Dubai or somewhere else in the world because you think the market's kind of pushing you there when that wasn't your goal?
One of the great things about internet is that it connects people. So instead of going with one or two people, wait until you hear 40% of the people say the same thing. If 40% of the people say they want the shoe red, make it red. If one tells you green, one tells you yellow, one tells you blue, all you know is that everyone wants a different color, and you need to have some way of fulfilling that. So I think, again, you have to focus. The dream is New York. Now, if you have to go to Dubai to get the money to go to New York, then maybe that side excursion is worth it. It's not where you start, it's where you end up. And so again, I turn it back to you. Your long-term goal is X, and everything you do is moving you closer, sometimes to the left, sometimes to the right, but that's just the natural pivot of life.
And with that in mind, what is the role of team in all of that? So, for example, for me, I've been a solo entrepreneur for most of my career, and certainly as my business has grown, I've brought in on a team, and that has been quite a learning curve for me in an adjustment for how I grow my business, where others kind of start off in very big teams. I know some colleagues who have co-founders of 5, which I think is, in some cases, quite a bit for leadership to really kind of move forward in a cohesive way. How do young entrepreneurs start off in building a team if they are on their own? And what are some tips in kind of finding those right members?
Well, I think there's, again, a lot of questions in there. There was a lot of research done recently by a colleague of mine from Techstars named David Cohen. And David researched the ideal optimal number of founders. Now, David, like me, is focused solely in the technology sector. You know, if you have a pig farm, it's not his thing. If you have a restaurant, it's not his thing. But he found the optimal number was somewhere about 2.9. So somewhere between 2 and 3, closer to 3 than to 2. And what they found was solopreneurs are great at starting, but they limit themselves when it's time to scale up and when it's time to get bigger. And there are exceptions to the rule. Richard Branson, Michael Dell, the majority of successful people, the Apples, the Facebooks, the Googles, the Teslas. You may only hear of one name, but there's almost always a partnership or a 3. And it's really about making sure you can answer this question. Who's your talent triangle? So we know from a lot of years of research that there are 3 sets of skills that you need in a startup. Remember, this is a startup. It's not a small business. In a startup, you need someone with business acumen, the ability to do business, how to incorporate, how to get websites, how to hire and fire, how to raise money for a company. You need someone with domain knowledge, someone who knows the customer, understands how they buy, why they buy, and most importantly, can access the customer. And you need someone with what we call operational experience, someone who's been there and done that and can build the product. So let's say you're building an online grocery store. So the key of an online grocery store is delivery. So you're going to need to have someone, A, who's worked in a grocery store, someone who's owned a grocery store, someone who understands why people have to squeeze the fruit before they buy it. And then you're going to need someone with the business skills to be able to raise money, to brand it, to get the trucks ready. But also you're going to need someone to build the website, someone who knows the security level. Those 3 sets of skills, business acumen, domain knowledge, and operational experience, have been proven to be successful in about 89% of the sort of agreed upon successful startups. You just don't always hear about each individual. It's much more glamorous to think of the superhero, the lone wolf, but it's not how it works in real life.
I was at an entrepreneur conference in New York, and there was a speaker that talked on a very similar thing about the triangle, and I really liked. I was actually with my mother at this conference, and she was sitting beside me, and they were describing the founder, and and he's like, the reason why a founder needs this triangle and these other two individuals, the operations and the kind of the strategy and such is. The founders are kind of like squirrels. We see things shiny and we move towards them. We come up with ideas. We're visionaries. We come up with idea, and then 1 minute later we're like, oh, and it would be really cool if we do this too. And did you think about this? And so you need those other kind of foots to the triangle sometimes to ground you and think of the actual operations and processes and execution, like you're saying. So. I
think
find
you can
that
also use the triangle. I think you can also use the triangle as a tool of analysis. So you're a solopreneur. So ask yourself, which areas of the triangle are you weakest in, and how are you going to address that? Remember, every member of the triangle can be a co-founder. They're not all one founder. The real key to a good founder relationship, one that's a partnership and lasts a long time, isn't what most people think. What we've found is you want people with similar beliefs, similar work ethics, similar visions, but very different personalities and skill sets. You know, you want a hacker, a hustler, and a designer, or a hipster is what they joke. Hacker, hustler, and hipster. But at the same time, they all have to have the same vision that we have to stop drought in the South Sahara. And as a result, that's why we're together, even though one of you is X and one of you is Y and one of you is Z. The key is to have similar beliefs and different skills.
If you look at a triangle on a map on a piece of paper, each of you make the points, but that center area, that kind of matter that the triangle creates, needs to be shared among you. That's your vision, so to speak. And I think that's really
totally
important
agree.
because you need that vision. That's so important as a startup. If you don't have that vision, that's your fire that keeps you going sometimes. And oftentimes what makes you connect with your initial customers, clients, investors is what that vision is. So going a little bit deeper on that concept, what happens for those of us who can't find those other points to our triangle? Do you have any advice for us to still kind of get our startup up and running or kind of pursuing it without having to kind of get stuck?
I'm telling you, you've given up too soon. You see, there's this cool thing called Google, and with it you can find almost anything. So if you can't find a founder in your social network, and I don't mean Facebook, I mean the real life people you know, then that's okay. You can go to founderdating.com. You can go to cahoots.com. You can go to angellist.co. And you can put your profile up and search other people. But you're not looking to date. You're looking to co-found. And again, the best part is they could be in South Africa, or they could be in Israel, or they could be in New Zealand. Because everybody can work asynchronously, meaning contributing at different times, and they're geo-agnostic, meaning you can live anywhere in the world, your team doesn't have to be side by side. We've now proven that. It's helpful, and eventually that will have to happen. But in the beginning days, just expand your scope of search.
And I think that being globally connected now has given us the opportunity also to scale our businesses as much as not only get those starting foundations. With that in mind, with the social media, what is the best way for an entrepreneur to use social media? We have so many options out there. Is there a specific social media tool that you would recommend that keen entrepreneurs kind of get on or focus a little bit more in building their network?
Okay, it's a secret, so you'll have to really listen closely. You ready? Okay. The best social media tool for all entrepreneurs, no matter what kind of business you're building, whether you're a entrepreneur, a solopreneur, a tech startup, whether you're in Pakistan or California, here's the secret. The best place to be is where your customers are. If all of your customers love Instagram, then you have to become the guru of Instagram. If they're a bunch of Twitter heads and they all want to tweet and state their views in 148 characters or less, then that's where you go. But if they all hang out at the mall, then go to the mall and do social media the old school way. Sit in the food court and talk to people. You have to go where your customers are. Your number one job as an entrepreneur is to understand your customer.
I like that you added in the old school way. I think sometimes we forget that in person. I find myself catching that all the time. I won't be able to like get someone's not replying to an email, and then someone would suggest to me like, well, have you called them? And I've caught myself sometimes being like, well, no, I never even thought to do that. Sometimes we think so digitally that we forget that there are some traditional ways that can be sometimes more effective.
Absolutely.
A good example of that is direct mailing. Who does that right now? Like, who thinks of that? But sometimes with certain clients and customers, depending on how they operate and what demographic they're in, direct mailing can actually be really effective because people don't get a lot of mail anymore.
If I was giving a coupon for orthopedic shoes, I would do direct mailing. My mother is 75 years old, and she loves seeing the postman.
I know some people have they have processes where that's what they do. They go through their coupon books on a certain day of the week, or they look through their flyers on the Thursdays when they get it from the grocery stores and such. And so I definitely agree with you that you got to understand your customers and understand, particularly, I think, going back to the very beginning of our conversation, understand that vision and let that vision kind of guide you.
But Kelly, it's more than that. You have to understand where they are. You're going to eventually build a product, a service, a solution, if you will. You're going to eventually need to make some money, which means selling it to someone. So you have to go where they live. You have to be amongst the people. Sitting in your basement thinking of what someone else needs isn't going to work. If you're going to help football fans follow their team when that team is on the road, if that's your solution, then you should go and stand in the stadium parking lot and talk to football fans. My favorite story from startups is from the founder of Uber. So Uber is the ride-sharing service. So when he wanted to know if there was a better way, he needed to do two things. He needed to confirm that people wanted a better way, customers wanted a better driving service, and that taxi drivers or that there were drivers who wanted to drive. So what he did was he went to the San Francisco airport and hailed a cab, got in the cab and asked the cab driver to do a full circle of the airport. And while he was on there, he asked him all of these questions about what's it like to be a cab driver and what would you like to have changed and what's your biggest problem and what do you hate. Then he hired a cab the next day and rode in the front seat asking the passengers the same questions. Now, that's what I'm talking about, going where your customers are. You're not going to get that on Reddit. You're not going to get that on Facebook. You're going to get that by going face-to-face and getting out of your building.
In the field is that's so it's such a creative strategy, and I think the in-person connect is definitely needed. But sometimes your immediate market might not be you might not be able to have that in-person connection. So if your market, let's say, is in Asia, and you're still based in Canada, how do you advise move?
You
Even
either want to do this
or
you
starting
don't
your idea.
No, then move. Take a trip to Asia, spend a week there, and spend every hour in the place you think your customers are, confirming it. Why would you pack up, move to Asia before knowing people will pay? Go build a prototype, stand in the middle of whatever city in Asia if you're talking about, Hong Kong, and talk to people as they go by and show them your products. If they don't stop and give you money, then you shouldn't move to Asia and sell your products. Or go back to your home, wherever that might be, and see what the problems are of your neighbors. Remember, your goal is to be a successful startup, not to be a successful startup in Asia.
Yeah, so you have to be able to pivot, and I think that flexibility, it comes down to that flexibility of not being necessarily set on that end product or service, but being set on that goal of that destination, so to speak, of our New York City that we're trying to get towards or such, and being able to shift your market. Wonderful. And so in summary, if there's one kind of key takeaway for an entrepreneur who has this idea, so they've had the idea, maybe they've tested it a little bit with friends and family and such, but need to take that step to go to the market. One last piece of advice you would have for our listeners?
Yeah. Go to www.100stepstostartup.com, and I will walk you through step by step what you need to do to take your idea, to test it, and to go to market. And I'll give you a money-back guarantee that if you finish all 100 steps and you're not happy and don't have a revenue-generating startup, I will give you every dollar back. We know the path. We've mapped it. It's not just me. There's lots of work that proves this. But what we've done at Ryerson and what we're very proud to talk about is converting it to a step-by-step roadmap. And if you follow it, yes, some things can be third or fourth or switched, but it gives you the exercises to do, like we've been talking about, finding your channel, going into market. Well, what questions do you ask? Well, we have a step about that called customer discovery. Today, the path is known. We've seen it from Google to Facebook to Uber, and we've mapped it backwards. We're not geniuses, but if it works for 1,000 companies, it's going to work for you. So the best advice I can give you is choose to be an entrepreneur. You don't have to spend a lot of money. You can test it so you don't have to put your risk out. You don't have to quit your job. You can start with small steps to give you the confidence that you're moving in the right direction. If you can't go to Asia to test your products, then go to a place in your city where similar people come. Maybe they're all in the airport. Maybe they're all in one area of the town. Whatever it is, go to your customers. Check it. There are known steps. Make new mistakes. Don't make the mistakes that you should have already learned from. That's the piece of advice I'd end with.
What an amazing way to close off, and I think you're right in that flexibility of knowing that there are steps and there is a path to get to your journey, but being comfortable knowing that those steps can be in different order, like you said. And if you take the wrong step, you can go back down and start again and get to your destination. I love it. Thank you so much, Sean, for spending the time with us today and sharing some of your insights. For our listeners now, it's your turn. What do you think? Tune in using the hashtag Bridging the Gap and ask Sean any other questions that you might have, and join into the chat to add your own opinions and conversations to some of the topics we've talked about today. And we look forward to hearing your thoughts. Thank you again, Sean, for being with us.
It was an absolute pleasure. Let's do it again real soon.